right, hello everyone and welcome back. Let's do a quick test. Let's make sure everything works fine before we start. Any technical issues, please let me know. And welcome again. So we don't have much time. We only have 40 hours to finish an MVP, a minimal viable product called CrewSync. CrewSync is a security operations platform targeted for security companies that provide the security day-to-day operational work, which also can be applied to staffing as well, casual staffing mainly, not much of a full-time, but it's more of the casual staffing. All right, so with that, let's just jump into it. By the way, the series is going to be in English, but also don't be disappointed yet. We're going to have another one in Arabic language with another platform. I'm not sure if everything is working fine, so I will assume we are good to go, unless you let me know in the chat if there is something wrong. So let's talk about CrewSync. There are so many ideas, but not too sure yet. But the main thing that we need to solve is obviously managing. I'm not sure why I started that one. See, that is too small. All right. So the way we're going to be doing this is by taking it from the top level, and then we drill down bit by bit to the specifics. So from the top level, what the software is doing, it manages rosters. That's one thing. It manages timesheets. All right, so timesheets, that's one of the main functionalities. Don't yell at me yet, because the big picture is not too clear yet. So that's why we're taking it slow at the beginning, just to specify the main functionalities, and then we drill down, and then we're gonna go to speed up very quickly with everything else. So what do we have beside timesheets? We have compliance. All right. So with the compliance, not compliance, so with the compliance, managing like incident reports, for example. So this is a big one, by the way. So let's make sure incident reports. And we want to have also reviews. So reviews is going to be a multi-dimensional. And what I mean by multi-dimensional is in a workplace, like if you are on the shift, you can review the client, you can review the shift itself, you can review the supervisor. And on the other hand, the supervisor can review all of their staff. Client can review the shift, the supervisor, and the staff, and everything. And the idea behind this is to extract KPIs. How it's going to work, I don't know yet. That's what we're doing. That's why we're doing this. All right. So with the rosters, what is this? Who's calling now? That's not a good time. Okay, so with the rosters, it's based on the client's requests. Okay, so the client's going to request from the contracted company roster coverage. They will specify what do they need for what shift, what to start, when to finish, and so on and so forth. So this belongs to managing rosters. So probably we're going to do this in modules. So rosters also will lead to the timesheets, right? Or actually, the workflow starts from the client make a request, the system manages or issuing notifications to all the staff. The staff will be responding to requests who's available, and then the system will issue the schedule. The staff will cover the shift. They will obviously enter their timesheet. So this is the main functionality of the whole software. Alongside that, we have to do the compliance, the incident reports. So incident reports is an operational on site, on the shift. Reviews can be obviously after the shift. What else it needs to cover? It needs to cover a basic CRM, not full-fledged CRM, but a basic CRM, just to manage clients' request messages, issues, all of those kind of things. So it's not a fully-fledged CRM. We don't have a sales pipes, all those kind of things, because the system assume you've already had the clients, which means the system needs to have an onboarding functionality. From there, you will need to onboard the client, you onboard the staff as well, and from the client, you onboard the contract, and from the contract, you onboard the venues. All right. So because a single client can have one contract, and that contract can cover multiple venues. So how that works, obviously, like we said, we onboard the contract, and then we onboard the venues, and then we onboard the staff. Now, we're not going to be handling onboarding staff in terms of the employment contracts and all of those things. No, I mean onboarding the staff to the application, to the platform. Okay, so that means we step back for a bit. Means we're going to have an admin dashboard. Means we're going to have client dashboard. We're going to have the staff dashboard. All right. So the admin dashboard, the client dashboard. No, actually, the client dashboard and the staff dashboard, they need to be an app based. So this is the app based section of the platform. This one can be web based. So this one is what we're going to develop using filaments. So this is going to be a filament PHP dashboard, or an admin panel as they call it. But the client dashboard, I don't need this. The client dashboard, that's going to be Flutter app. Staff dashboard, obviously, is going to be another Flutter app. Well, it's going to be the same Flutter app, but different interface, different functionalities. All right, with that being said, that means we need to have a model to handle the clients and their contracts and their venues. A model to handle the staff, or actually the whole onboarding is going to be its own model. Then we're going to have a model to handle the client's requests. Compliance, another model. The CRM, also another model. In the CRM, after the timesheet is being issued, we need to get on the invoicing as well. All right, so that means we're going to have the invoicing. We're not handling payments, okay? We've got nothing to do with the payments, but once the timesheet being issued, we're going to handle issuing invoices just to track what's happening. Now the timesheet, which needs to have roster based, so the roster specific timesheet, which include everybody who was on that roster, and then the specific employee timesheet, right? That seems right. Okay. Now with the compliance, we need to have incident reports. Now this is a normal process where you see somebody is designing something, but they keep jumping from a section to a section, because right now, like I said, the idea is right there, but it's unclear. That's what we try to take it, place it on a board, and then we start simplifying, and then discard what we don't want, keep what we want, and then we take it on stages, right? So that's why it's a bit confusing, and also it's unorganized. You look at an unfinished product. This is like as we're doing it live, you know. So but again, once we nail down the main workflow, we're gonna go and speed up the process. So compliance will have incident reports, the reviews. Reviews will also impact directly to the KPIs, and that's very important. And also we need to handle the policies and procedures. All right, so policies and procedures, they can be global, and they can be specific. And what I mean by this, global, so you might have a policy and procedure that are applicable to the whole business and overall, but also you might have a policy and procedure specific to a contract, or to even to a venue, to be honest with you, not just the contract, to the venue, to the specific venue. You might have say, for example, in the policies, you might have a specific uniform, and or specific time starts and time, like when do you start, maybe 5-10 minutes before, a specific inductions. So some sites will require a very specific induction to the site, and so on and so forth. So that's what global, that's business wise, maybe a specific, which might be contract specific or a venue specific. And that the same applies to the policies. Also, it's going to be a global or specific. Those will be PDFs, so we're not going to be generating them through the interface, because most companies, they already have that in place. So we don't want to reinvent the wheel by recreating another PDF functionality, right? Okay. All right, so we covered the incident reports. Incident reports. This incident report is going to be the on-site one. So it's while the staff covering a specific shift, they might be generating incident reports. And those incident reports can be minor and can be major. The minor ones, I think we're jumping ahead because I'm thinking about the interface as well, because that's the incident report is going to be in the app interface. It's not going to be in the dashboard, even though we might be able to do it. All right, so the client request comes in. The system checks the availability of the staff. So that means while we're onboarding the staff, they can and they will manage availability or manage their own availability. And when they manage their availability, which can be because once the employee manage their availability and they say, so for example, they say Monday I'm available between 6 p.m. and 12 a.m. and Tuesday between 3 p.m. until 9 p.m. the system will need to send those who available based on the client request. Obviously, when the client request comes in and the client is requesting a staff from 6 to 9 p.m. on a Tuesday, the system needs to check who is available in that time frame, but also they actually available, so they're not booked for another shift, or they're not covering another shift on the same time frame. But also at the same time, and this is important, they also need to check with the reviews, okay? And reviews or KPIs, stuff like this, but we're gonna name it appropriately later. But the idea is, if I'm requesting, now I'm the client, I'm requesting staff to cover a shift on a Tuesday from 6 to 9. Part of the process where the system is finding who's available is that the client hasn't marked them as negative, or they negatively reviewed them before, because some clients will send a feedback to the companies and they will say, okay, don't send us this person again because, well, he wasn't appropriate to our style or our business, or he's just not fit within what we're doing. So they don't want that person to come back again, and that part of the review process. So the system will need to also keep that in mind while they're finding the available staff to send the notification, to send the request, and then flag those who received those notifications as the available staff. And when that happens, when they respond, okay, so this is important. We're gonna call it what? An ad hoc or on the fly. Let's call it on the fly for the time being. So on the fly availability. Okay, so on the fly availability is, we might put an option for the employee while they're managing their availability, is an optional to get notification. Okay, what I mean by this is, say for example, I'm available Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and I'm not generally available on Fridays, but I might be interested to cover on the fly, on ad hoc shift, let's call it, or on the fly, whatever. So I'm interested to see or to get notifications about any request or any shift coverage on Fridays, okay? Even though that in my general availability, I don't have it. All right, so with that simplicity, those are the main functionality: onboarding a client with their contracts and their venues, onboarding the staff manages their availability, all right, and then the system manages the client requests, and from the client requests it orchestrates the rosters, schedule the rosters. Staff will arrive on site, they will be using the app, they will sign in, and that triggers obviously the timesheets. When they finish, they sign out, that becomes an entry in the timesheet. In the settings, maybe at some point in the invoicing model settings, we say, okay, maybe every Monday to Friday or Monday to Saturday or something like this, to generate the invoicing, aka it will go through every day, collect all the timesheets, generate the invoices regularly. Here, that's what the invoicing, that the staff means will need to have positions, all right? So the same staff member might play multiple positions, and that's very normal in this type of industry. Sometimes you will be covering a shift as a supervisor, sometimes you cover a shift as a team member, all right, and sometimes you cover a shift as an operational supervisor, which means like if there is a multiple venues on in a specific area, that operational supervisor might jump from a venue to venue just to check on every shift, right? So multiple positions which can be played by the same staff members. Obviously, this is managed by the company themselves. The company will say, okay, we have this guy, he's really good, and then we might promote him to have the other position. They will not have that title, all right? So don't confuse the title with the position. I'm gonna worry about the terminology later, but the concept is, if I'm a security officer and if I get promoted by the operations, that I can play a team member, I can play a supervisor, I can play a second in charge. Okay, this is another position. The pay rate for each position is different, right? So if I'm covering a shift as a supervisor, is different from if I'm covering a shift as a security officer or a second in charge. So that is get decided by the operations, all right? And when they schedule in the rosters, when they schedule the staff members, they will assign them their position, and based on that, obviously, the timesheet, once it's calculated, the invoice will reflect on that. So on the invoicing, you might see for the same employee, he covered X amount of hours as supervisor, X amount of hours as a team member, and so on and so forth. So that also need to, we need to keep that in mind. All right, so now, what have we covered? We onboard the clients, their contract, their venues. We onboard the staff manages their availability. The system receives the client request. The client will be using their app version, and they will say, by the way, this is another thing. All of this is dynamic shifts, all right? So those are dynamic shifts, meaning the staff will be in and out for different venues and different contracts, but also for the same contracts and for the same venues, we might have a recurring staff or permanent staff. This obviously depends on their choice. So we would definitely need to have a place to manage what we call it, let's call it recurring for the time being. So recurring, which means if the client is requesting 3 security officers in total, All right. One of them is going to be supervisor. There is a high chance. Is this getting disconnected? It says it's getting disconnected. So. Okay. No, I think we are good. So when that happens, the system needs to also prioritize the permanent staff for those venues. On sites, the staff will obviously handle the incident reports and reviews, which is after the shifts, policies and procedures, which can be global, business-wise, client-wise, or specific to a contract or specific to a venue. And a minified CRM just to manage the client relationship. So it's not going to be fully fledged CRM, because we not be creating sales and leads and all those kind of things. We might do it in the future, but it's not vital to the application itself or to the platform itself. All right, so with that being said, let's see what actually being built. Oh, what do we need for this to happen? We're going to need a back-end system. So with the back-end is going to be a REST API, obviously, so we connect to our apps, and our choice is going to be Laravel. We're going to have an admin dashboard or an admin panel, and for this our option or our choice will be Filament PHP. I'm thinking if, yeah, the admin and the super admin, that's all. The super admin and the admin panel will be a Filament, but the actual user or the apps or the user front end will be using Flutter. So let's use Flutter for this one. So let's start expanding on those ones. What do we need with this one? We need a database choice, which is going to be Postgres SQL. With this one, well, let's use PostGIS as well for geographical functionality, because there will be a bit of location functionality to track certain stuff. What else? Let's use Docker for both development and production, which means once we finished building the backend, we will have to build the image, and then we deploy the image as a container, which serves the application. And this is also applicable to both. What else do we need to use? With Flutter, let's use GetX or maybe Riverpod. Yeah, I think let's use GetX for now. Let's use 4UI. Okay, so 4UI is a very good library for user interface components and blocks that we can just put. There are, from memory, by the way, most of this comes from my experience, like real life experience. I worked in the security industry many years ago, and that's that's what I'm trying to apply here is my own experience into this solution. So from memory, there were some places, some venues where you don't have internet connection, which means because like inside a building or in many cases, some cases you don't have internet connection. So we need to be offline local first. Okay. You see where the complication is start to happen. So this is where the real challenge will start, is doing all of this within the 40 hours, and we are already in 30 minutes away, but that's good. So to have an offline local first, meaning we're going to need a local database to Flutter, which is because we're using Flutter, we're going to be using SQLite, obviously, and we can use Drift, is it, from memory? Let's put a question mark for now. I think it's called Drift from memory for the SQLite, and we need to have a sync solution. Now this is going to be a custom sync solution. We're not using something off the shelf like I can't remember what they're called, but with the sync solution means we need to have the work, like background work. All right, so background tasks that handles the syncing when it's online, offline. Obviously, the preference is going to be online. Or actually, no. Actually, no. So let's do it offline first. Offline. You launch the app, we sync down, you use the application, all the data is local to the application, and for every interaction, it's just create a queue. Or maybe, no, it creates a queue entry to the main queue for the background task. And in the background task, that's where it calls the API. All right. Anyway, I'm just thinking about the actual implementation, but for now, we're just specifying the main. Now, with the REST API, we definitely going to have documentations. Let's use Scribe. I used Scribe and I like it. I love it. It's easy to generate really high quality API documentation, which what we can use. Postgres. I do believe that Laravel has I'm quite confident it has the data type, the column data type for the migration. So if we go to migration and then column types, it is somewhere. Columns, available column types. Yep, spatial type, geography, geometry. I do believe we're going to need geography. Yep, there we go. All right, so with this one, so identify as a powerful spatial type depends on your database driver, which is okay. Yep, that's why we use in PostGIS. All right, so that is solved. With that one, also, we need to use Reverb for WebSockets. I do believe Filament also supports WebSockets for notifications. Yep, it does. Okay, so for now, so for all of this, we're already getting complicated. So now let's start thinking about our ERD, the entity relationship diagram. So what do we have? Well, obviously we have users. With the users, it's going to have an ID of an integer. That's going to be a primary key. So we can have some preview here as well. Let's go back to our notes as well at the same time. Let's take it from the top. Client. The client is also a user. So the client is a user, the operations are users, the staff are users, because I'm not going to be creating multiple users type. Instead, let's create roles. So let's have roles. And with the roles, what we can do, we can use SPATI roles and permissions. All right. So I'm not going to be specifying the ERD for roles, and yeah, probably I should, to be honest with you. And the reason I'm saying this is just because in the future, if we decided to switch the backend, maybe if we decided to switch it from a monolith application like what we're doing into a microservices application, so that might be something we just need to specify in terms of ID, integer, and primary key. But what I will not be doing is I don't see the need that we create the anchor table. Okay, and what I mean, I'm sorry, I jumped ahead, is because the relationship between the users and the roles are many-to-many, and the relationship between the roles and the permissions are also many-to-many. And also there is a relationship between the user and the permission as well, which also many-to-many. So there are actually 1, 2, 3 anchor tables to make the many-to-many relationship possible. But if I specify the Laravel specific style of anchor table, I might confuse myself in the future with, if I switched, say for example, if I switch from Laravel to to server port, server port has its own way of handling the many-to-many relationship. So what I will be doing instead is I would just specify so what we're going to have is, say for example, OPQ, so user role. I'm thinking if I just maybe better do it like this way. Because user one-to-many here and one-to-many here, which makes roles and users many-to-many. But what I'm saying is user ID underscore role ID is going to be the primary key, which is pretty much Laravel specific. I don't remember working with other platforms or other frameworks where using that specific so probably that's what I will avoid here. Yeah, so that's what I will try to avoid, is the Laravel specific. So then we have the role permission. which makes the relationship between the roles and the permissions many to many. And then we should have the user permission as well. So the idea behind the user also have a direct relationship with the permission is because if the role has those specific permissions, well, we will act based on it. But also the admins might decide to give that user a very specific permissions, and that permission or permissions is not part of that specific role. So it's like you give them special permission that does not exist in their assigned roles. So that's why we do need to have that specific. So name is going to be a string, and name, which also a string. Now users, what do we have? We have name as a string, we have email as a string, and then we have passport as a hashed string, and then we might add more to it. There will be more to it. All right, so that cover the basics. So that cover the fact that we have different user types in the system. Each user type will have their own roles, permissions. Now let's go back specific to the client. So we're going to have a contracts table. And instead of calling it user ID, let's call it owner ID. Or actually client ID. Yeah. Which references, as a foreign key, it references the user. But inside the contract, it's called client ID. Just for clarity, if we are manually dialing into the database and we're doing some queries, it makes more sense to us what we are working with. I don't want to worry about the specific columns. So let's say start date. That's going to be a timestamp. End date. The string, the status is going to be in enum. Active, inactive. Let's call it draft. When the contract starts, when does it end? What is the status of the contract? And then we have a table for, should we call it venues or locations? No, let's call it locations actually. Let's call it locations. And part of that location is the type. Which also is going to be an enum, like warehouse, store, office, or whatever. Okay, it might have a name. So just in case if it's a venue or if it's like a pub or a club or a restaurant or something like this, which might have a name. The address in text form, and the actual location, which will be in point form as a data type. That's why we'll be working with Postgres. So that location needs to know which contract, right? Which contract ID, which is first the contracts ID. Okay. So the users, assuming the user role is client, will have contracts. Again, we will be expanding on the columns. We will be expanding bit by bit on the actual migration flow. I'm just trying to place the most important columns for the time being. So those tables will actually grow with us. All right, so the location, which we said it belongs to which contract, what is the type, what its name, what's the address, what's the location. All right, so now we switch that to locations. How do we want to handle the staff availability? Or maybe let's continue on this route with the client requests first. All right, so now I've entered my client, I've entered their contract, and I entered their locations. Now the clients will make requests. Okay, so the client request, who is making the request. What else do we need to know is which location ID. We need to know for which location they're asking, okay, which venue. You know what, I'm not gonna, should we continue calling it locations? That's gonna confuse us down the road. So let's call it venues. Can't really decide right now. Wait, is locations a reserved word in the database? I don't believe so, but let's check that. Is locations a reserved word in Postgres? Location. Okay, it's non-reserved. Cool, that's good. So that's fine. Because I usually use the column title as location. Never had an issue before, but I don't recall doing something what I call the actual table locations. And this is a bit of something new, but at least it's not the reserved word, so shouldn't be a problem. All right, so we now know who's the client making the request. They're making the request for which location. Request date, that's created at. The status, obviously, an enum. Pending fulfilled. Instead of approved or approved. You can't really reject client request, otherwise you would be closing the business. well, let's say it's approved or receive filled. We also need to know the shift date so shift date, start time, and end time. So which date is the shift, when to start, when to end, and the type of the shift. Okay, because we still need, maybe the client is requesting for somebody for, you know, every Monday or every every Tuesday, and also it might be just a one time. I just need 3 security officers this Thursday, or I need 5 for Saturday, or whatever. So we still need to know what is the type. And also we're going to place those as an enum. So that covers the client request. So the request comes in, we extract this information. Our system will find who are the security officers available for that time frame, for that type of request, and for that type of shift, and it will send the notifications. Every single officer who receives that request, or they will receive the information of that request, and then they will answer by available, not available, and who is available will be placed on the roster. So we're going to need to have a rosters table. All right. So roster, which belongs to contract, obviously, for week start, date, week end, date, This requires a bit of thinking, because you can deal with the roster as a daily roster or a weekly roster. But also, if we deal with it on a daily basis or a shift basis, that will overcomplicate the invoicing calculations, right? Because what we want is the simplest way to extract. So the rosters is not going to be for the contract. Instead, it will be for the user ID, which is in this case, let's call it an employee ID. Okay, and since that employee will be able to be working with multiple locations, so that means it's a many-to-many relationship with the contract. So we're going to have a table contract roster, because it's actually the entry. The entry, it's not. Yeah. That's better because the entry is the client request ID, is the response of the client request. So we have a track back to when did we decided he is on that roster. And then assigned date, start and end time. And that becomes our timesheet entry. And from the client request, we can get to the relationship of the location. Yeah, that is a little bit better. Client requests, where we have the client request, and then from the client request, when the employees respond with a join request, we will see how we're going to handle that later. And then we're going to create rosters for those employees, aka their schedule. And their schedule is a weekly schedule, which can change based on those roster entries. And the entry itself will be linked to the request ID. In this case, we can get the extra relationships as well through the client request. Assign date, this start time, which is the actual start time. Is that going to be the actual start time? Do we want that to be the actual start time? Yeah, the actual start time. Then we are going to extract the timesheets. So who is the employee? And here, no, we need to do the roster entry ID. Let's make sure we have the correct namings. The entry date. No, you know. Yeah, now I want the timesheet also to be its own entity. And here in the entries, I will tell which roster entry, when did they clock in, when did they clock out, break duration. I'm not going to worry about that for the time being. So there will be status, starting with a draft, submitted and approved. So the timesheet, once it's on, once you finish with your timesheet for that, do they send the timesheet daily? No, I think you will have to submit the timesheet on specific date or on a specific every day. So every Monday, every Tuesday, you submit your timesheets. And that's when the timesheet is always a draft. And when the date, or when the day comes in for you to submit the sheet, that's when it changes into submitted status. And when you submit it, it get locked, aka you cannot change it anymore unless Obviously, the admins or the operations will manually unlock it for you, or they will update it. We will see how we're going to do that later. But the main concept is you create the timesheet, or the system create the timesheet. The system prepares the timesheet for you based on all this information that is provided and supplied previously, because we're trying to minimize the user interaction to the minimum. We want to rely on the system to automate most of those things. And the timesheet entries is when you go to which roster entry, obviously. And in here, we might have some, we're going to need to have some machine learning code to match. That can be later as well. So might be version 2 or something. All right, so the timesheet entry, clock in, clock out. They finished. Now the interval, so for every, whatever the contract says, every 2 weeks or every week or every month, generate the invoice by grabbing every timesheet that is approved, obviously, and then compile that into an attachment, and then create the master invoice where it says for which contract. All right. Now the invoice is the contract, not the location, because in the locations, or the contract may have multiple locations. So I'm sending you an invoice for all of those locations. Yeah, that might be interesting, because if you are talking about a venue that belongs to that client or belongs to that contract, but that venue might be under a different management or different, but that's an internal to the client, not to the company who is invoicing the client. Therefore, we should always be invoicing the client based on their contract, and we might come back to that and update it. All right, when did we issue it? When it's the due? What's the total? I may not be using decimals. Yeah. The status: paid, unpaid, overdue, and draft. We need items or entries instead. For which invoice? What is the description? No. Or should we just attach the invoice instead of having the invoice entries? Because the invoice entries are generated based on the timesheet entries, right? So instead, but if I grab the timesheet entry directly inside the invoice, that might take the flexibility of adding extra data. So instead, here we still need to count for the hours. That's going to be decimal. For the entry, and then the timesheet itself I will worry about that later. Total hours. No, I don't want to have a one-off total hours, because like we said in the beginning, the same employee might be covering different positions and he might have different total hours per position. So the total hours, rather than being a decimal, I think that might be a JSON-B, okay, or a JSON, whichever. And by that I mean it might be easier for us to track that through an array, and then we can create an accessor to it, or mutator, whatever, to transform that data type into an array of total hours. And in this case we can have total hours as per position. So position, total hours, position, total hours. Might be one position, doesn't matter, but at least we have that ability. And the reason I'm making it JSON-B, because I still want to have it as a searchable or indexable at some point. So the entry itself, well, the entry will definitely be is going to be very specific. So the entry will have to have, well, a position ID that it belongs to the positions, which we don't have. So let's make that table positions. This is not contract based, so this is generic. What is the title, the description, and there is no hourly rate inside the position, because the position is going to be nothing more than just way to attach that metadata to the entry. So positions, ID, title, and description, which means we're going to link the positions to the user, right? Because that's going to be a many-to-many. So the user may have multiple positions, and actually no, because positions is going to be a generic table just to handle the positions metadata. And when you assign the roster entry here, you would assign the user what position. So in here you would say, okay, what's the position ID of that entry? Yeah. All right, so I'm the operation manager or the operations team in general, and I'm assigning this security officer to their shift or to this roster, and I'm adding that entry to their rosters of that week, and I'm saying for this client request, he will be assigned this position: supervisor, second in charge, team member, and so on and so forth, right? Now, in their profile here in the user, which would going to be a profile, which I will make it of JSON-B, for example. In the profile, we're going to have their positions. So it's going to be profile dot positions, which will be an array of whatever positions he can have. Because if you think about it, if I'm looking for a specific employee to assign as a supervisor, I need to know if he actually can be a supervisor. And in the profile, I can say, okay, this guy or this employee has in the profile dot positions, he has team member. And as a team member, his hourly rate is X amount. If I have an entry there saying supervisor and then his or her hourly rate, it means he is someone I can have as I can assign as a supervisor. All right. So using that only, that's why the positions, the table positions, is going to be generic. Okay, no relationship with other tables. All right, so now in the timesheet entry, since I am linking to the roster entry, I don't need to have the position in here because I can get it through the roster entry ID. So I can have what is my position as a relationship, but I can get it through the roster entry, so I don't need that extra position ID. All right, so all of this subject to a bit of tweaking and changing. Remember, right now, all we're doing is just preparation. All right, so we're just trying to get as much as we can from the head onto a bit of paper, or in this case, a bit of files. All right, so now we've got the timesheet entries, and then the cron job will kick in based on the contract terms, which we might need to have that in the table itself, but we can do that later. So through the cron job, it will kick in when the time comes in, and it will calculate, or it will grab all the timesheet entries Okay, so if the timesheet has been submitted, okay, so it will need to grab every timesheet entry that belongs to a timesheet of a status draft. And then from there, it will create a new invoice of that time frame, and then we'll add all those invoice entries to it. So that invoice entry will need to know the timesheet entry ID. We don't need description because obviously that's a timesheet entry specific. The unit price for the invoice entry is calculated through the timesheet entry, where the timesheet entry has the roster entry, and through the roster entry we can get to the position and the pay rate through the user. and the timesheet entry has the total hours. So now we have the total hours, which means we can calculate unit price, which will be the total hours times the unit. Sorry, we will calculate the total price through so the unit price comes from timesheet entry dot user dot profile dot positions, right? So that's how we are getting it through the timesheet entry. Sorry, the timesheet entry has the roster entry, sorry, so it's not that. So unit, yeah, no, I'm correct. Yeah, I'm correct. So what is the positions, where the position is equal to whatever that position is, and then we get the rate. That's their rate, and the total obviously is calculated by how many hours. Okay. All right, so our client made a request. The request was filled. The system generated the rosters. The employees has covered the shift. The system generated the timesheets. The employees will review their timesheets. They are happy with it. They will submit it. The operations will review it. They're happy with it. They will approve it. We will deal later with rejecting or modifying and stuff like this. They approved it. The system, while the cron job is working, it comes into the specific date. It will grab all those entries and generate the invoice and add the invoice entries to it. If the invoice already generated, it will append those invoice entries to it. And we're done. Now, on the shift, what do we have? Well, we have incidents. We have incidents or incident reports. Yeah, incident reports. Let's be specific. So which roster ID reported by, which is the user, the date, the description. I'm not gonna worry about the resolution for the time being. Table incident reports. Reported by the, we need to have the type of the incident. Okay, it might be actually, yeah, it's going to be minor, major, critical. And obviously it will have other attachments, maybe voice recordings, images, videos, or whatever, but again, that can come later. We need to have table notifications. Not why they're suggesting that. We need to track the policies. and the policies are not going to have the content, because again, those policies will be PDFs. So it's like documents. Should we just make it a documents in general and handle those as document type? No, actually, because policies and procedures can grow very quickly, so I will keep it in its own table. So policies and then procedures. Again, you know what? Let's have some title and description, and here we're going to have a title as well. There is no relationship, no direct relationship. We don't want direct relationship between the policies and the procedures. The reason for this is you want to link the contract. If there are policies and procedures for that, right? So the contracts, yeah, so that might be, and to be honest with you, the policy and the procedure can be many-to-many with the contracts as well, because it's the same policy. If it's a global policy, can be applicable to all contracts, and this is where the operations or the admin will decide. They will decide where this information belongs to, right? So this is an operation person or operation admin. They will be assigning, okay, this policy belongs or applicable to this contract, and this procedure applicable to this contract. So contract policy, and then contract procedure. So many-to-many on both. So where is the contract? Here we go. Contract, invoice, policies, policy procedure. Where's that? No, contract procedure. Contract. Okay. So now we need a way to specify an extra metadata for those type of policies and procedures. For example, the procedure might require an acknowledgement, right? Or might require certain conditions. So the contract itself will have to have a metadata. Okay, so let's make a metadata. Let's make a JSON-B for the time being. And the reason for this is because I'm not quite sure yet on what is the final shape of this information or how it's going to be. So for example, before I can access to the site for the first time, I might require to go through a specific procedure. All right, so in this case, if I have to do that procedure, I need to describe to the users what that procedure is through the document itself. This is the specific document, but also when I have to get some metadata for the user to understand when that procedure is applicable is it applicable once? So for example, if it's an induction procedure, you do it once. If it's a recurring procedure, you do it every day, you do it every week, and then where that track of information, where is the history track of all of this is going to be. So that's why I would keep it as a meta for now. But if it's a weekly inductions or a weekly procedure or a daily procedure or a once a time procedure, we do need to track that. Has it been done or not? Hasn't been done? So now we need to track, what are we going to call it? What are we going to call it? If I'm supposed to do that specific procedure, should I call it task? No, because I still want to have a task type in the system as general. So I might call it something different. So in this case, not actions. That doesn't make sense. Don't want to call it an activity, because because in the future, if I'm interested to track the user activities inside the system itself, I might have to have activities table, and activities table makes more sense to be called activities. Executions, I don't want to call it executions, because I might use the word executions for the syncing queue. So in this case, if I call it procedure activity, maybe start with this before we forget the concept, right? So let's call it a procedure steps. No, it's not steps. So procedure activities. Can acknowledgements considered? No, acknowledgement is more that if I give you the procedure, did you read it, or have you read it or not? But that's more of an acknowledgement, and that's probably applicable to the induction, right? So in the induction, have you acknowledged it? And that's where the signature comes in. But that's not going to be applicable here, because that's also, let's call it an activity. So let's call it an activities. So with this one, I can have type of enum so it could be completed, could be reviewed, not deleted, not created, could be acknowledged. So that's where probably I'm going to use the word acknowledged. So that where the procedure needs to have a type. So the type, I can't, yeah, this is a bit tricky. The type, I cannot use an enum because it could be anything, right? I don't want to limit myself or limit the user to only those three options. So we're going to have a procedure types. And here we're gonna be procedure type ID. So here we need to have signatures. Again, we're gonna make it JSONB. Which will be an optional anyway. Okay, all right. I know it doesn't make a lot of sense yet, and this is also subject to a lot of changes, so it's not going to be perfect from the first couple of hours of what we're doing. It's more of bit by bit we will put this in a more sensible way. All right, so from here, what do I need to do? Let's work on the backlog for now. For this to work, I need to, the user can this is something we haven't thought about, is onboarding the users and the client, which needs to be through an invitations system. And when I say that, we need a way to invite the user right? So invitations. So an invitation for an email with the token, with that role ID, who is invited them, sent, and accepted. Okay, so that means I need to have the user can invite users per role. So this is where the company, the security company, can start sending the invitations, right? Because the initial security company user, which will be the super admin user, will start sending invitations to users, assigning them the roles. So once they invite the user, they need to be able to, well, accept the invitation and join the system and have the dashboard access. Okay. From there, I need to have the admin can add new contract, because let's call it admin here, right? So this is an admin. So we differentiate who is doing what. So the admin can invite the users, they can invite them as employee, as another admin, as a client. Now that admin can add a new contract or actually can manage the contract, and then the admin can manage the contract. What did we call it? Locations. Okay, now I have in the system, I have my clients, I have my contract, and I have my locations. This is all based on the contract details, right? That means now the client can make request. But before the client can make a request, I need to say employee can manage their availability, right? So before I can let the client make a request, let's do the employees where they can manage their availabilities, right? And then admin can manage employees profiles. So they can manage the employee profile. This is not the personal profile of the employee, but the operational related profile. So for example, they can say this is their rate when they are supervisor, this is their rate, whatever. And since we're doing that, once we finish, once we finish a shift, we need to have the reviews, right? So the review, which what do we call it? Author? Let's call it review by and review for. But now that review, like we said in the beginning, because this is multi-dimensional review system, so the review not necessarily for another user. So you're not reviewing just another employee, or you're reviewing the supervisor, or you can review the venue itself. All right. So you as the employee, you as the security officer might give a good review or a bad review for the venue. You didn't like it. It's, you know, too dirty or whatever reason that is. And then you want to block lists that venue so you don't receive any notification about it, or you're not interested into working in that venue. So the system and the operation can differentiate where you want to work, where you not want to work. And this is the same thing applies to the client who says, okay, we don't want that guy to come back, and something like this. So that's why probably this is going to be more of a polymorphic relationship rather than just a direct relationship. So let's say, what's the score for now? Any comments? And review date, that's going to be you know, created date and so on and so forth. But I can't worry about the details later. But this is going to be a polymorphic relationship. So what we're gonna call it, reviewable, is it? Reviewable. Okay, so definitely that's going to be a polymorphic. So the user is reviewable, the location is reviewable, okay, all right. So now, so let's see. Admin can invite users, admin can manage contract, can manage locations, and employee can manage their availability. This is assuming the admin invited another user as employee, and the employee gained the access to their dashboard. They entered, they manage their data. The admin can manage the profiles, whatever relevant to that. And in here, let's say they can manage their availability and profile. The client can make requests. The system sends notifications so about the request. So it sends the notifications to who is, what's the correct term, who is available for that request, or who's available for that. Employee can action on requests. Okay, so they can respond to those requests. They can say I'm available or not available, or they completely ignore, or whatever. So employees actions, system then assigns rosters. So the system will generate the rosters based on those actions. So whoever is, then admin manages the rosters. Okay, so in that case, the roster will not be published yet, right? Because when the request came in, the employees has responded to them, the system has assigned the rosters. Now the admin will need to manage that roster by approving or maybe shifting employees. So so the roster will have to have the status of, not the roster entry will need to have the status of scheduled, cancelled, completed. If it's scheduled, as in approved, cancelled, completed, maybe pending. So let's put a pending as well. So when you, as the operation, you say, okay, I have all those pending roster entries. Let's see, I'm happy with that. Approve, aka it's going to be scheduled, cancelled. So the user, the employee, will see in their dashboard exactly what is happening, and they get always the most updated roster entry. Remember, we said the roster as a roster is going to be from this week, from week start this date to week start this date. And let's add another status here: draft, finalized, or published. Okay. So the admin manages the rosters. Now employee, they should be able to clock in and clock out. I don't see a reason we do clock in, clock out individually. So clock in, clock out. System generates timesheets. And then employee submit, review and submit timesheets. Then the admin, and in this case, admin manages the timesheets. Once the admin manages timesheets, system generates the invoices. Once the system generates invoices, admin sends or manages, let's say, and the reason I say is manages because I want to include in a single sprint. We will be trying to apply a bit of Scrum in here. So in a single sprint, I want to cover multiple actions by saying the word manages. So rather than having a card for each action in here, instead I have a single card, and under that card I have multiple actions. So when I say manages the invoices, that includes say here. So for example, send the invoice, or maybe modify the invoice, track the invoice, send manual reminder, and so on and so forth. So that's why I tend to use the word manages rosters, for example, manages invoices, manages timesheet, because I want to include all those actions within that term. All right, so we're managing the invoices, and for the specifics, by the way, we will be expanding bit by bit with our plan. I just want to put or document as much as I can before the actual development starts, right? So it's very important that I can just extract as much information as we can. And again, this is a very normal process for any software being developed. At the beginning, the vision may not be 100% clear. It comes bit by bit, because remember, we are software designing this as we go, because we are designing the software. In a typical environment, you may not be designing that software because the idea or the whole software design comes in from a different department, and you will just receive that information already made accessible and made available for you by different department. If you're talking about Scrum methodology, that might be the product manager, and maybe the product master. I don't like using that word, but yeah, I would say just the product manager. And the product manager in a Scrum may not be a software developer, and doesn't have to be a software developer. It could be just a skilled manager in general. And their responsibility is to communicate with the client, extract all this information from the client to understand what they want, what are the requirements, what are the main functionalities, and so on and so forth. And they will be doing most of this documentation for us, and then they pass it down to our technical software design, because this is the generic software design. In generic software design, you're just describing what is the scope of the project, what is the project main functionalities, stakeholders, and so on and so forth, right? But then you bring it down to the technical software design, where we start doing stuff like the ERD, the entity relationship diagram, class diagram, sequence diagram, and so on and so forth. Well, I'm not going to be overcomplicating this for this project, because I have only 40 hours to come up with the MVP, the minimal viable product. So that's I'm trying to skip the non-vital steps, right? So we're still getting the benefits of the main steps. But again, how do you expand on that? That's totally up to you. All right, so once the admin manages invoices, well, pretty much that's it. All right, so we are about to hit the 2 hours mark. I'm going to try to keep it under 2 hours for each session. But on holidays, we will be streaming multiple sessions. For the Arabic content, like I said in the beginning, we will be doing another project. We will follow the same structure with a different project, and it will be in Arabic. Yes, so we will definitely be streaming in Arabic as well, 100%, to satisfy both. But I have 1, 2, 3 projects. 3 projects, yeah. So 3 projects. I will be trying to come up with the MVP during the Christmas holidays. All right. So what we have 2 weeks, and we have very short time, to be honest with you. So that's going to be a very nice challenge. So, but again, we're challenging ourselves to see if we can do it or we cannot do it. I'm quite confident we are more than capable to do it and achieve it. And again, the MVP is not going to be skipping any major functionality. We're not going to be skipping any major features and stuff like this. So we're not going to be trying to cut we're not going to be doing shortcuts to achieve the MVP on the account of deploying something weak. No, absolutely not. We're going to be developing something beautiful using all the best of what we know. Again, there is still a lot to do, but just to recap, we have to have a RESTful API. Okay, that RESTful API has to have documentation. So this is one of the things that we will have to do. We're gonna have the super/admin panel. We're gonna use Filament PHP for it. I'm quite confident Filament, especially I've read a lot about Filament version 4, have a lot of new features and enhancements, stuff like this. I'm really excited to use it. I've used it on a hobby project when it was version 3, or was it 3 or 2? Can't remember. And I did enjoy working with Filament. I found it very, very nice, very beautiful. I like the interface, the simplicity of generating very nice and quick forms and tables and all those kind of things. I like it. I'm excited to refresh my information about version 4. I've read there's a lot of enhancements, new features, and stuff like this. Flutter, we haven't worked with Flutter for quite a bit of time. It's been a very long time since we worked with Flutter, so I'm excited to get back to Flutter. I've been using native Swift and native Kotlin, and I don't like it. I don't enjoy it too as well. So it is what it is, but I like doing Flutter. From memory, we were doing getX, but also we might be doing RiverPod as well, or we pick one of those. We're going to be using an offline local first concept. We still have to have a local database, synchronous solution, background tasks. We're going to be using 4UI. Is it 4UI? Let's make sure I spelled that the correct way. Yeah, 4UI. A very nice Flutter specific user interface. So we will be basing our user interface based on 4UI. And that's it. No, we're not going to be doing any paid content. So Arabic or English, we're not going to be doing any paid courses. That's just too complicated of a commitment. I probably won't be able to deliver. So we're not going to be doing any paid content, at least not in the next year or so. So everything is going to be free. Everything is going to be on YouTube. Yep. So I'm gonna reschedule another event for tomorrow, and then we're going to keep going with what we're doing as we are doing. The thing is, this stream was a first stream after we haven't streamed for a couple of years from memory. Is it 1 year, 2 years? Can't remember. Do you remember? Kind of, I think, yeah. So let's see what's the quality of those videos, if it's good, if it's bad, the audio, the image, so we can enhance. But I will see you tomorrow. Thank you for being here with me. I appreciate it, and I will see